Recently, I learned how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! If you haven't seen that video, I'll put it in a card, but it's about an hour long where I talk about my experiences learning the game and everything that was going on. And frankly, there wasn't enough time in that video to go over every idiosyncrasy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it's a pretty unique game in terms of the TCG space. And rather than making that video like 2 hours long or going really deep on a bunch of different topics, I figured that I would just plan to make more videos later about some of the elements of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I found particularly interesting. The first one that I want to talk about is the extra deck. The extra deck is the most unique element of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think. Many things about Yu-Gi-Oh! Are unique. The resource system is very different, but the extra deck is the thing that I think really sets it apart from most other TCGs. That's not to say that other TCGs haven't adopted similar mechanics at times. The most obvious one is that like Magic the Gathering's commander format is literally centered around a one card extra deck, which is your commander. So, I mean, it's not as though these things don't exist, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is certainly the first and is certainly the one that takes this mechanic of having a separate deck of cards that are functionally always accessible to you to its greatest heights. What is the extra deck? If you're coming to this not knowing 100% of how this works, let me give you the kind of Cliff's Notes version of how the extra deck works. The extra deck is a 15 card deck that is separate from your main deck and side deck or sideboard. And at any time, if you can fulfill the summoning conditions of a monster in your extra deck, you may do so. It should be noted, by the way, that extra deck cards are always monsters. There are no spells or traps that go in the extra deck. There are a couple of different types of extra deck monsters. There are link monsters, there are XYZ or Xyz monsters, there are synchro monsters, and there are fusion monsters. These four types were all introduced at varying different times. Link is the newest, fusion is the oldest, I believe. And they have slightly different mechanics under which they need to be summoned. I'm not going to talk about specifically how that works here right now, but all you need to know is that different decks are going to be typically focused on different types of extra deck monsters. You'll have decks that are focused on summoning a bunch of different link monsters. You'll have decks that are focused on summoning a bunch of synchro monsters. And what this does, what the extra deck does, is introduce consistency into Yu-Gi-Oh! In a way that doesn't exist in basically any other game. Basically, with the extra deck, if you can fulfill the basic summoning requirements of your extra deck monster, you can often unlock the rest of the combo that your deck is trying to accomplish through the extra deck. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is tuned in a way where most of the time that is in fact the case. And so as a result, this is one of the main driving forces for why Yu-Gi-Oh! Is really fast, has short games, and why Yu-Gi-Oh! Engines tend to be so powerful. They're very consistent, and they're not reliant on drawing 2 or 3 cards out of your 40-card main deck. Oftentimes, they can be assembled by drawing 1 card and then leveraging your extra deck to build the rest of the combo. The title of the video is a case study of how the extra deck is the most interesting, but also the most problematic mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's definitely true. Even though this mechanic is very interesting and very cool, it has absolutely introduced some problematic elements to the game at times. There are a couple of different things that can happen to make a kind of problematic extra deck monster. The most obvious one is when they are overpowered and they are generic. Some examples of these would be like Baron de Fleur or Appaloosa is another good one. I actually don't know the full name of that card. It was before my time, but these are the ones that I could find that were kind of like most recent. Or another one that was recently banned is Herald of Arclight. These are cards that are typically very powerful. Oftentimes, they're going to have access to negation. They're going to either negate one thing, or in the case of Appaloosa, they negated multiple things. And most problematically, these monsters were very generic. A lot of decks could get to these monsters out of the extra deck, and it just resulted in games sometimes devolving into who can assemble their extra deck combo the most easily, and that's going to determine what the best engine is. And that kind of takes away from the uniqueness in deck building. If the best things to be doing out of the extra deck are generic and not locked to a specific archetype, then all of a sudden the best archetype is just whatever can best assemble those generic things. And that's obviously problematic. There are also other extra deck monsters that are too powerful because of their effects, even though they aren't necessarily like fully generic. A good example of this is, I think the card is called Shockmaster, which summons for, it's an XYZ monster that requires you to have 3 level 4 monsters in order to summon it. And then once you summon it, you can detach material from it to lock your opponent out from using one of the 3 core types of cards on their turns. You can lock them out of playing spells, traps, or monsters. It's game winning. It's an effect that in Yu-Gi-Oh is called a floodgate. Very, very powerful. And although not every deck can access it because it requires you to be playing level 4 monsters, it is so powerful that, you know, it basically means that the best deck is going to be whatever can best produce the level 4 monsters required to summon it. So that's one of the things that can make the extra deck kind of problematic. The other thing that can happen with the extra deck that can become problematic or weird has to do with card evaluation, or I guess I should say I want to talk about card evaluation first before I explain it. If you look at a card like Moon, which is a really innocuous looking monster, if you were coming to this from outside of a Yu-Gi-Oh context, you maybe didn't have that much information about what the best decks were, and you were just trying to work out why this card was powerful by reading its text, you might think, oh, this card must be powerful because using one of your other your opponent's monsters as a tribute to summon a Link 5 is a play that comes up often, and the deck that wants to play this has a powerful Link 5 monster that it's going to summon, and that's what the engine is about. And if you're an experienced Yu-Gi-Oh player, you know that this card is powerful for 2 reasons. The 2 reasons are its typing, that it is a light fiend, and because it summons for 2 effect monsters, which is very generic. Moon is an example, and a banned example, I should mention. This card is not legal anywhere other than Master Duel, I don't believe. Moon is an example of a bridge. What Moon allows you to do is turn any 2 effect monsters into it, and then from having this one singular light fiend monster, you can do the entire Fiendsmith combo line. So Moon can go get another monster out of the extra deck, which gets you a monster from your main deck, which then can get another monster from your main deck into the discard pile. You can then get it back and then summon another thing from the extra deck. I won't explain the whole combo here, but basically all of this to say, if you can get a light fiend into play, you don't need no other cards even in your hand. You just need to have the engine slots allocated in your extra deck and the cards in your main deck, but you don't have to have drawn them. They could just be in your deck. You're going to tutor for them. Bridges are, I think, the biggest modern source of design issues in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. What we've seen in the last couple of years especially is decks are often okay, or engines are often okay if they would be played in their pure form, if they only existed as a single engine by itself. But Konami has kind of enacted this policy where they have been creating engines that don't lock you out of playing other things. And as a result, a lot of decks have turned into decks that are just trying to build as many engines into them as possible. A good, really clear example from modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Mitsurugi Yummy. Yummy and Mitsurugi are both reasonable engines on their own in the pure form, but because the Yummy engine, before Herald of Arclight was banned, could go get Herald of Arclight into play and then tribute it to go find Habakiri, which is the main combo starter for Mitsurugi, it meant that you could all of a sudden staple these 2 engines together, and you only had to draw one starter from one of the engines in order to be able to basically fully enact both. Bridges are very cool, though, at the same time, and when you find a unique bridge that maybe someone didn't see before, that can be a source of a really cool feeling, and it's something I think that is really what most players are looking for in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck building process at this point. A lot of the actual in-engine deck design is pretty clear. Konami prints really obviously templated cards for the archetypes, and obviously you need to figure out what the numbers of them you're going to play are, how exactly the combo lines work. But the real interesting elements come from figuring out how to bridge from one engine into another. And that's where players oftentimes find the biggest source of advantage in a metagame, is if a player can figure out a new bridge, a way to play multiple engines together in a way that no one else has before. This was all leading up to a case study that I wanted to do because I've been having a lot of fun playing this deck, and it got me thinking about the extra deck and why the extra deck is so interesting. So I already mentioned Mitsurugi, powerful engine that you can play by itself, but is most commonly paired with other engines because there are so many ways to use the extra deck to bridge into Habakiri. The kind of colloquialism is all roads lead to Habakiri. There's just so many ways to find a ritual monster, which is what Habakiri is, and as a result, you can basically splash it into a bunch of different engines. And in the TCG, at least, they have been trying to ban out as many of those things as possible. King of the Feral Imps is one card that has gone for this reason as well. And they've certainly been trying to make it so that Mitsurugi is less splashable in other decks. But you can still play it pure. You can still play it with Fiendsmith very cleanly. And as I said earlier, people play it with Mitsurugi Yummy. But recently, a player on Master Duel found an even more kind of interesting, and I think we have to say that it's degenerate, even though it's definitely my kind of my kind of deck. This was found by a Twitter user, Normal Ahau. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing their name properly, but it was posted on February 19th on Master Duel Meta. And essentially what this list is doing is it is playing pure Mitsurugi with one extra card in the main deck, which is Rank Up Magic Argent Chaos Force. And then it is paying the low price of, I think it is 6 extra deck slots. It's slotting in, it's using 6 of its 15 extra deck slots in order to turn its deck from being a mid-range deck that's very resilient, good at running into boards, capable of wiping your opponent's board with Ame no Murakumo no Mitsurugi. Like, that's a very powerful effect that is often what the deck functions around. And instead, for the low price of 1 rank up magic and 6 extra deck slots, this deck now has a first turn kill, which is extremely degenerate. And the way it works is fascinating. So I will walk you through exactly how the combo works with a visual aid. I've been playing the deck on Master Duel, so it'll be running in the background while I'm talking about it. But the basic idea is that you first are going to do just the core Mitsurugi combo. Now, I'm going to explain this maybe in a little bit more detailed of a way than you would typically hear a Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTuber do so. One, I'm not the most familiar with everything yet, so it's going to help me to explain it that way. Two, I want my content to be accessible to people who aren't necessarily 100% entrenched in a card game. I'd like for them to be able to still watch the video and at least get some appreciation of why these things are neat. So if you are already really well kind of entrenched in how the Mitsurugi combo works, you can skip ahead. I'll put a little timestamp to let you know when I'm done the basic explanation and when the combo explanation starts. But if not, please feel free to stay and I'll explain the whole thing. Okay, so I lost my replay, unfortunately, of me doing this in ranked, so we'll do it this way. It might be easier anyway to demonstrate, but like I said, I'm going to explain in more precise detail than I think is entirely necessary, but just for purposes of clarity for people who maybe are not the most familiar with the lines of this deck or the mechanics of this game, I think this will be easier to follow. So the basic premise with Mitsurugi is that you want to start by getting Habakiri into your hand as early as possible. So a lot of the time you just have it naturally, but it recently was limited to 2 instead of 3, so sometimes you'll have to find it. In this case, I'm using pre-preparation of rights, which is going to let me get a Habakiri here. Then I get to activate Habakiri, and in this scenario, I'm just going to go and get a Mitsurugi no Mikoto Saji. put that into play. And the reason why this is good, or why Habakiri is so oppressive, is that basically this starts the whole combo from nothing, essentially. So Saji lets you search for a ritual spell, or any spell or trap, actually, with Mitsurugi in the name. But what we're going to go get is Mitsurugi Ritual. This is the spell that lets us ritual summon all of the big monsters, and they're the way we're going to win the game. So next, we activate the Mitsurugi Ritual. We're going to special summon a card from our hand. In this case, it's the Habakiri. And we're going to do so tributing this Aramesa and this Lamia. Importantly, and something that's slightly different about this specific draw that I have, is that I have the Mitsurugi Numokoto Kusanagi in hand. And because I have this in hand, I have to play slightly differently. Normally, you would have tributed that as one of the costs of the ritual. But because I have it in hand, I have to do this slightly differently. So now I get to normal summon the Kusanagi, which is going to return the ritual. Normally you would tribute it as part of the costs of the ritual in the first place, and that would just allow you to get the ritual back right away. Next, you're going to ritual out a Mitsurugi monster from deck. This is the second option of ritual. And in this case, you're going to tribute summon, Futsu no Mitama no Mitsurugi, and you're going to tribute the Habakiri on the field. The whole reason why the Mitsurugi deck is powerful is because this engine of ritual monsters that resummon themselves and search for a card when they're tributed is very resilient to hate, and can basically build up from nowhere quite cheaply. If you ever get to tribute one of these monsters, you typically get access to your whole line, and that's very powerful. So here, this Habakiri is going to come back, and I get to search for a spell. In this case, I'm going to get the Mitsurugi Prayers. The Habakiri comes back. And now I can use this Futsu that's in play, and this Mitsurugi Mirror that I searched at the beginning with pre-preparation rights to summon the Murakumo from my hand. There are different iterations of how you might do this part. Honestly, like, kind of all roads lead to Rome once you get the pieces moving, but essentially it's going to work where once you get the first 8-cost Mitsurugi monster in play that resummons itself, you're going to use that one to summon the next one, and then you'll use the second level 8 Mitsurugi monster to summon the third one. That's the short version of how this typically ends up working out. So now I get to add another card to my hand. At this point, it mostly doesn't matter. Let's say if I was playing against a real player, I would probably get the Great Purification, this trap card that you could use to disrupt your opponent. But in this case, it doesn't matter. I'm going to put this back into play. And then the last thing I have to do is activate the prayers. I will tribute a monster because of, if I was playing against a real person, I probably would. I'll tribute the last level 8 ritual monster that hasn't been tributed. So this one's going to come back. I'll get to add a Mitsurugi monster from my hand, or to my hand. In this case, I would add this Wusu just as a piece of interaction. It's not important though. You don't need to know about that part. And then I'll resummon a level 4 monster from my graveyard to the battlefield. And lastly, the Mitsurugi Mirror triggers to go back into my deck, and the Murakumo is going to come back onto the field. So now, oh yeah, and I get to add a card. We'll add this last thing, this Magatama, which again, if we were playing against a real person, we might use this disruption if something happened. But now this is sort of where you would typically set up the typical Mitsurugi end board, and that would usually involve doing something like making IP Masquerena and planning to summon SP Little Knight on your opponent's turn, and leaving a Mayatama no Mitsurugi in Futsu no Mayatama no Mitsurugi in play to resummon a bunch of the things that you've subsequently tributed. That's how it would normally play. And the reason why this deck is so powerful is that if your opponent has had no interaction, that typically means that their hand is full of gas that they're going to use to try and kill you. And if you are only setting up the normal Mitsurugi end board, yes, it's pretty powerful. You get an Omni Negate, you get a removal spell of some sort, and you get most notably Futsu resummoning things. That can push through a lot of things, but for your opponent is starting with 5 cards, a lot of the times they can actually just still beat that, and they can push all the way through that. You also get to resummon Murakumo at some point and kill all your opponent's monsters as well, which is also quite powerful, obviously. But all this to say, this is beatable. So whether you want to believe that or not, it is beatable for some decks. So that's where the combo comes into play. So from this position, and this is how your board needs to be set up to be able to combo, technically you can be -1 level 8 monster. You need 2 level 8s and 2 level 4s. So from this position, you start by getting Gimmick Puppet, Fanta 6 mechanics, and you contribute 2 level 8s. In this case, I like leaving the Futsu in play just because if something did go wrong, that's the one that you would want to have left behind. This is going to come into play, and then you're going to detach a material from it. In this case, I would detach the Murakumo. And I get to go get the rank up magic from my deck. This is, again, remember, the only card that needs to be included in the deck in order for this combo to work. Everything else comes out of the extra deck. So you rank up magic, the Gimmick Puppet Fanta 6, into this number C107 Neo Galaxy Tachyon Dragon. Quite a mouthful. And then once this enters play, you can activate its ability by detaching a material as well. In this case, you want to detach the Gimmick Puppet. This has the added benefit of actually locking your opponent out from activating cards on the field if that were a relevant thing for you. So next, you get to overlay on top of this the Galaxy Eyes Full Armor Photon Dragon. And doing so will trigger the rank up magic effects in your discard pile. This will come out of my graveyard back to my hand. I get to use it again. Rank this up into the CXYZ Gimmick Puppet Fanta 6 Mechanics. This is going to go face up as well. And we are pretty close to ending the game at this point. So now when this enters, we get to resummon the other Gimmick Puppet monster to our side of the field. And that's going to get back the rank up magic for one last time. We are going to special summon Raider's Knight using the 2 level 4s that we created during just the regular Mitsurugi loop. Then detaching one of those from the Raider's Knight, we get to make a Raid Raptor Fiend Eagle. And at this point, we have all of the tools that we need to combo. So first, we activate the Fanta 6 Mechanics to get detaching the Neo Galaxy Tachyon Dragon. We then give that to our opponent. This has 4,500 attack points. We decline to activate this effect, importantly, because otherwise you would destroy the monster and then not be able to win. Next, we get to rank up magic for the last time, and we rank up into the number C15 Gimmick Puppet Giant Hunter. And then we get 2 activations, which will deal 4,500 damage apiece and kill our opponent. First, the Fiend Eagle activates, detaching a material, doesn't matter which, targeting the Tachyon Dragon. This is going to deal 4,500 to our opponent. And then the Gimmick Puppet Giant Hunter activates, detach the 1 material that's attached to it, target the dragon, you will destroy it and deal 4,500 to your opponent and end the game. So yeah, that's the full combo. And the reason why this is so powerful is that in the context of Mitsurugi, a deck that is very reasonable at going second and running into opponents' boards, this kind of shores up one of the main weaknesses which the deck has, which is that it's going first board if there are no other engines in the deck is not as powerful as most other things that you can be doing in the format currently. you either kind of need to be playing Yummy in order to have more Omni negates and other interactions on the board, or at least be playing something like Fiendsmith to have access to another set of interactions through that. And what this does is basically say, okay, if I'm going first and my opponent doesn't interact with me, I win. I'm just going to kill them, which is good because that's the one scenario that you oftentimes would run into problems with. If your opponent has interaction and they're able to disrupt your Mitsurugi combo, you typically still get to end with a reasonable half board, some amount of monsters and disruption. Mitsurugi is quite good at playing through hate in that way. Basically anything other than Droll and Lockbird is beatable, and you can still put a decent amount of stuff on the board. But the one issue you can run into is if you run into an opponent that has no interaction but has a hand of 6 engine cards, you might lose to those 6 engine cards because the typical Mitsurugi end board finishes with like 4 or 5 pieces of interaction and only one of them is an Omni negate. So it's not crazy by any means as far as how you could be doing in this format. The last thing I wanted to mention is that this combo isn't even all in. You aren't in a position where if you go for the combo and you get disrupted, you are all of a sudden going to lose. This is a clip from a game that I played where my opponent had one piece of interaction that had an Ash Blossom that I cross-out designated, so I kept going, and they had infinite impermanence for the first part of the combo, so I didn't get the rank up magic. But if you look at this situation, I just get to still make IP Masquerena and pass with Futsu in play with two cards set. So I'm still passing with like 4 interactions, I think. 1, 2, 3. I guess it's 3 interactions, but then Futsu is going to bring back this Murakumo from my graveyard. Like, going for the combo doesn't even indicate, like, it doesn't even lock you out of having a regular game plan. It's not like if you brick on this, you do nothing. Like, if you brick on the combo, you just have a relatively normal looking Mitsurugi on board. Maybe it's like -2, I guess. It has 2 fewer interactions than you would have otherwise, probably because you would have turned the 2 rank 4s into like a Gallant Granite to get Nibiru or something of that ilk, and maybe you would have turned the other 2 rank 8s into something else. So maybe you're 2 fewer interactions than you would be normally. But I mean, if you look, this is still, especially because my opponent had to use 2 pieces of non-engine, plenty of gas to get through what my opponent is doing. So they go for this Rescue Ace field spell. I get to SP Little Knight it. I'm not even like playing this optimally. I haven't played against Rescue Ace before, as you can probably tell. But I get rid of their field spell. They summon a Diabell Star. The Diabell Star triggers. I get to get a Murakumo back to destroy both their monsters. They have 1 card in hand. Like, I still have an Omni negate backing all of this up. They set this Wandered Seeker Sinful Spoils. I destroy their monsters. They try and go for an emergency in response. I counter it with I negate it with the Murakumo, and they die. And like, because they started with 4 cards, because they had to use 2 non-engine cards, not dying to the FTK. I mean, they just didn't have that much gas, and I still got to pass with a reasonable board. So yeah, deck is gross. It does a bunch of really gross stuff. So yeah, it's a really interesting deck in that regard. Shores up a really interesting part of the matchup table that Mitsurugi has trouble with. And as a result, I do think there's a non-zero chance that this deck might catch a ban or 2, because if you look at the results of this deck, it's already carried a player to top 10 in ratings duels. It's also carried a couple of players into Masters very comfortably. Someone brought it to Joshua Schmidt's community tournament, played it to a top 4 finish as well. There's a pretty funny reaction of him on stream realizing that that's what this deck was doing, and he was unhappy about it, which, you know, fair enough. I do understand.
No. Well, I guess I'm not even surprised anymore that Habakiri can do this.
But overall, I think this deck is really emblematic of why the extra deck is so cool, because Mitsurugi is a deck that does not require any end deck pieces, any of its end board pieces to come out of the extra deck, which means typically its extra deck is full of utility monsters, things that are maybe a little bit more situational or just generic powerful interaction pieces. But because it doesn't have to play anything in its extra deck typically to support its own engine, you can make these interesting splashes. This splash might be too good. There's a non-zero chance that it is, I think, but but it's very sweet and very cool, and I think this deck is really interesting and emblematic of a very cool component and unique component of the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG. So that's all I got for this video. I wanted to talk about the extra deck and about how it's cool and unique, and I've been playing a bunch of Mitsurugi FTK because it's really fun and really degenerate. So that's how this video spawned. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe. One thing I didn't mention in the video, but I've also been thinking about is that like most of the cards for this deck are not actually Master Duel exclusive. Like with the exceptions of like Red Reboot, Habakiri's at 1, not 2 in the TCG, and King of the Feral Imps is banned in the extra deck. But like that card, I've literally never summoned King of the Feral Imps in this deck in all of my games playing, and I've played like maybe 15-20 games at this point. So part of me wonders if maybe there's something interesting that you could do in the TCG with this strategy. I know that in Magic, there is sometimes this sub game that goes on in best of 3 where a combo deck has the option to, in games 2 and 3, sometimes either side out its combo or side much lower on combo in order to kind of juke what the opponent might bring in out of their sideboard. And I haven't heard of a Yu-Gi-Oh deck being able to do this in quite this way. Let me know if there's one that I'm not aware of. But I think it's kind of interesting that you could register this in the TCG. Game 1, maybe you're on the play, you go first, you get to kill them with the Gimmick Puppet FTK. And then in game 2, you just take the rank up magic out of your deck, bring in another regular kind of pure Mitsu card and some sideboard cards, some side deck cards, and you just play the next 2 games like pure Mitsu, and your opponent has to respect the fact that this FTK is in your deck, but maybe it's not anymore. I don't know. Let me know if there are other decks that do this in the TCG or have done this in the TCG historically, because it's definitely something that happens in other card games. I've done it in Magic pretty famously. When you were playing Splinter Twin in Modern, you would oftentimes just cut all the Splinter Twins and play Blue-Red Control in post-board games. That was like a pretty common thing that goes on. And additionally in Legacy, there have been combo decks historically that have opted to go for like these sideboard jukes where they sided in like 8 creatures and sided out their combo in an effort to get ahead of all the combo hate that would be coming out of the sideboard. So very cool, very interesting. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Hand, except for itself, you can't add another copy of itself. So you get to go get a monster. With this effect, you can go get a Mitsurugi no Makoto Saji. This is another rank 4 monster. Oh, we have a cat. Speaking of rank 4 monster. So this is another rank 4 monster. This one has the same kind of text where you get the effect whether it's normal summoned or if you tribute it. This one, though, you're just going to normal summon. And this one says you can add 1 Mitsurugi spell trap from your deck to your hand. So now you're going to go get the next card in the combo, which is Mitsurugi Ritual. Mitsurugi Ritual says this you can use this card to ritual summon any reptile monster. In this case, they're going to be Mitsurugi monsters. Spoiler alert. And so what you're then going to do is you're going to use this ritual to summon from your deck. You can go get a Mitsurugi no Murakumo no Mitsuru Ame no Murakumo no Mitsurugi, sorry. And you're going to do that by tributing the buddy. All right, well, I guess I have to start over this bit anyway, but that's fine.